right, now, a couple of things. We wouldn't be able to run this meetup without our sponsors, so I'm just going to very briefly share a little bit about those. You can see the branding all over this. We are sponsored by Butter, this platform we're using today. If you would like to give it a try, you can access the 30% off your first 3-month subscription. I will share a link to do so. Agile Testing Days are a conference. I will be speaking at that in November in Potsdam, Germany. So again, give that a go if you're around in Europe and you'd like to either hear me speak or come and meet some of the great Agile thought leaders in Europe. And I also run a Scrum Mastery Pathway, part of Agile Mastery Institute. This is training the next generation of Scrum Masters over several months rather than a 2-day certification process. So if you'd like to join me on our next cohort, that starts next month. Now, we're here to talk about igniting action with data today with Julie. Now, Julie has kindly agreed to speak with us today. Julie and I have met a number of times, most recently in Lean Agile London, about a month and a half ago. And Julie is very passionate about effective delivery of value, and in particular, how data can be used to drive the right conversations. A pro Kanban trainer and works with Principality Building Society. I'll allow Julie to do the talking about who Julie is because she will do a far better job than I. Really great to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining us. Over to Julie.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you all for coming along. I'm hoping you get something valuable out of today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards as well. There's some really interesting things that came up in that poll. If I just start by sharing my screen.
On its way.
Yep, thank you. Can you all see that? Yeah, lovely. Hang on. Sorry, I'm having a bit of screen nightmare here. Here we go. Right. Yeah, so I'm Julie, here to talk today about my experience with data and conversations and using data to take action rather than just having it as a reporting tool, which it was a lot of the conversations in the breakout groups. So just to kick off, if I could get a bit of a good chance to use the thumbs up and thumbs down. How many of you here have seen The Matrix? I always find this fascinating that people who haven't. Lovely, thank you. So as most of you will know, in The Matrix, the main character Neo, he gets the choice of a blue pill or a red pill. So if he takes that blue pill, he gets to return to his life, he gets to believe whatever he wants to believe, but it's the choice of him putting his head in the sand and being ignorant to what's actually going on. He takes the red pill and he faces an uncertain future, but he gets to know the truth about what's going on. So it's an uncomfortable truth, but he also gives him the opportunity to take action and influence the future. And when it comes to software delivery, I believe we have the same choice with data. So we can take the blue pill, we can spend time looking for certainty, working to deadlines that are unachievable, and we can believe the illusion of the estimated date. Or we can take a red pill and use data that represents the truth, and that software delivery is uncertain. Trying to get to certainty can be a wasteful activity. So I'm going to talk to you today, spend a bit of time with us taking the red pill, going down the rabbit hole, and I'm going to show you how we've used data to ignite action and stop using it to give that illusion of certainty. These are just my experiences as well. We're not perfect by any stretch, but hopefully you guys will get some value out of this. So yeah, as Chris said, Julie Starling. I currently work for Principality Building Society and I'm a pro Kanban trainer. So I'm the practice manager for Agile delivery, and it means I get to coach and support and help grow all the Agile professionals in the company and help them to grow knowledge and skills in the team and the wider organisation. So I've been working in and alongside software delivery teams for over 15 years now. I'm really passionate about using data for conversations and to actually take action when you can rather than when it's too late. You might recognise the name if you're not familiar with Wales, because we sponsor the stadium in the capital city. Probably not that familiar with the company because we're a Welsh building society and we're predominantly based in Wales. So unless you're from Wales, you're unlikely to know what it is. But we're about 160 years old. We have about 1,200 people in total working for the company. And from a delivery perspective, we're made up of 3 value streams, 12 delivery teams. And some of those are Scrum, some are Kanban, some are Scrum with Kanban. So yeah, a real mix. Anyway, let's go back to our red pill and our blue pill. So I'm going to share where we were and where we are now. So before we started our journey down the rabbit hole, we used to work on big programs and projects, and we would have planning days, and we'd spend an awful lot of time with estimating and planning. Because of this, we were often chasing deadlines, we were re-estimating when we could see we weren't going to hit those deadlines, and we were trying to go faster. Like, we all know that estimates are just a best guess with the information you have at the time, which meant it was actually really normal for us to not hit those things and have to re-estimate along the way. So as we're trying to hit dates and get better at estimating, we weren't really solving the problems, we were solving symptoms. We weren't tackling the fact that the activity of estimating our way to certainty just wasn't working for us. So if we fast forward probably 5 or 6 years now, we now take a more probabilistic approach to deliveries. We use probabilistic forecasting, we have regular conversations on the action we might want to take based on the current data. So we use signals from the data, and we have continuous conversations, and we're able to manage expectations and solve problems and improve rather than struggling to deal with symptoms. So on top of forecasting, we're also using flow data to help us continuously improve, and DORA metrics to help us improve our software delivery performance. So I'm going to run through these last 3 points with some real data examples and just talk about how this has played out for us. Again, I'm going to caveat this with we are far from perfect and we are still on our journey, but I'll talk about what we've done, and yeah, we'll look at some real data.
Julie, just before you start the next part,
Yep.
sorry to interrupt. There's a couple of people in the chat that are unable to see the screen. They're saying it's black for some reason. So could I ask you just to restart the screen share? I'll cancel it. If I could just ask you to restart that, please.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Oh, it's not giving me the option to do that now. Let me try again. Sorry, 2 seconds. I'll just restart this.
There's your problem, Michael. Safari.
It's not Safari. Here we go. Here we go. How's that?
Okay, fresh screen share. For those that weren't able to see it, is it better?
Yes, no?
Alina? Yes.
Cool. All right.
At least one person. All right.
Lovely. So yeah, I want to talk then about so what is late anyway? What does it actually mean to be late? So if we look past the obvious interpretation, if it's late to me, it means you've mismanaged expectations. It means for you to be late, someone was expecting something specific by a specific date, which means it's likely we've been planning for certainty, and we're in an uncertain world when it comes to software delivery. It can also be really demotivating to be late. So sometimes I get told, you need deadlines unless otherwise the work won't get done. In my experience, I find exactly the opposite. The more regularly you're late, the less you care about being late because you're always late. Eventually, it just doesn't mean anything to anyone. It also drives unsustainable behaviors. So when people are late, this is when we might start cutting corners. We might, build up some technical debt, because we'll definitely get back to that later. A lot of things that are going to impact our quality. And ultimately, to me, it represents a lost opportunity to take action. So it means something happened between you setting that expectation and getting there, and we didn't do anything about it. And the reason for this could be that we're looking in the wrong place, not that we're choosing not to communicate it. So this slide might be a bit flippant, but I love Douglas Adams, so couldn't resist the opportunity to quote him. I've already mentioned that we're a highly regulated financial institution, so dates really do matter to us. We don't always have the luxury of delivering when we want to. We have a mix of work, so sometimes we have regulatory work and sometimes we have more product-based work, and we can use a data-driven probabilistic approach for both of these types. And as I've already said, we are not perfect. So there's times where we have to check ourselves and make sure we're not falling back into old habits and old ways of working. And this is actually more difficult with some stakeholders than others, and I'll talk about that in a little bit too. So I'm going to start by talking about probabilistic forecasting, so what I mean by this and how we've used it. So in any guise, probabilistic forecasting is used from economics to weather, and in our case, software delivery. It means that someone's using past and present data to make a prediction about the future. So when we're talking about software delivery, what does this look like? So it's really important to note that a probabilistic forecast has both a probability and a range. So for example, please, I think someone might be off mute, sorry. Two examples, these are both probabilistic forecasts. So they look slightly different to each other, and this is because one is talking about how much work is likely to be done by a date, and the other is about when we're likely to get, how much work we're likely to get by a certain date. So the percentage is our probability. So either the 85% or the 75%. There's not actually a right or wrong answer here. It needs to be whatever your organization decides is right for them. So you need to remember when you say there's an 85% chance of something happening, you're also saying there's a 15% chance that this isn't the answer as well, and that needs to form part of the conversation. So we use 85% of principality. It's just what we've chosen is right for us. The range part of these statements is either the number of items or the time frame. Really important to note, there's no certainty in these statements here. However, when you start using these with stakeholders, you'll find, especially early days, they will look for the certainty in these statements. And that forms part of the education that we'll get onto. And the most important thing is that we need to continuously do this. This isn't every few weeks or months. We need to be doing it daily or worst case weekly. And I'll show you why this is important with a real scenario. Before we get into that, so what do you need to be able to probabilistically forecast? It sounds like it might be a little bit complicated, but actually really, really simple. You only need the cycle time of 10 or more work items that were done by the same team, and the future work looks like the past, and that's it. So when I say cycle time, this is just whatever start and end points you choose for your system. When I say the same team, I mean, you can't use one team's data for another team. That's not how this works. When I say the future needs to look like the past, I don't mean you need to be doing the same work over and over again, because that's not the world we live in. But what I mean is you couldn't fundamentally change the structure of your work items or maybe your tech stack and expect to use the same data. But since we only need 10 items to get started, you don't really have to wait long before you can get going again. Once you've got this data, you then need to run a Monte Carlo simulation. I use Actionable Agile to do this. You don't have to. This is just the tool that's been working for us. It integrates with a number of tools as well, like Jira, Azure DevOps, Trello, a bunch of others as well. So I'm not going to go into the mechanics today of Monte Carlo forecasting, but I will put some resources and books up at the end. So if you're interested in this stuff, you can go dig in a little bit there. I'll give you in a nutshell view. So with Monte Carlo simulation, used in a number of industries, from economics, climate change, all that type of stuff. But when we run a simulation, it runs a random simulation on your data based on the question you ask it. But it doesn't just do this once, it does it thousands and thousands of times. So the example you can see on the screen here, that's run 1 million simulations over the data. So when we say something is likely to happen, there's an 85% chance it will happen on or before a date, what we're saying is out of those millions of simulations, 85% of them came out on or before a date. not going to get into the mechanics any more than that, but we can maybe chat about it at the end, or you can like follow it up with some of the resources I give at the end. So up until this point, I might sound like I'm contradicting myself a little bit. So I'm saying estimating and re-estimating can be wasteful, but we should forecast and we should do it continuously. So the difference is that probabilistic forecasts are based on real data. So there's no opinions, there's no guesses in there. There's no drain on the delivery team to create these. They're generated in seconds. And it allows us to be like approximately right rather than exactly wrong. This little calendar is something that gets kicked out of the tool I use. And this is really useful for conversations we have along the way. When we estimate, there is so much we miss. Even the most pessimistic amongst us can accidentally be optimistic. So we forget about the cost of context switching. We sometimes think in effort, not elapsed time. We don't take into account meetings or disruptions. And using real data gets around this because it's baked in already. So using forecast doesn't mean that you no longer have a date. It means you now have more information than you ever had before. And really importantly, you never had that estimated date anyway. It was just an illusion. Understanding that you never had that date anyway is half the battle with probabilistic forecasting. This is a weather forecast. I did of Cardiff a few weeks back. When we look at weather forecasts, we accept that they change daily. So I did this over a couple of days. So this was the next day. And you can see a few slight changes. Again, did it the next day, a few slight changes. We accept with the weather that it's a really complex problem to solve and the information, the situation is continuously changing. And we need to accept this for software delivery too. It's better to be approximately right than exactly wrong. So for these examples with the weather, yeah, there were some instances where it wasn't right, but it wasn't far off. And because we're looking at the information regularly, we can adjust based on the information we're getting. So I promised you data. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to look at an example from a team we had probably about 18 months ago now. It was a brand new team that we spun up because they wanted to try out some new ways of working. We had some features to get over the line. It just felt like a good opportunity to do this. So we're going to look at their data. So I'm going to add some data to this chart. This isn't the data, obviously. There's going to be a line that appears on this chart that's going to represent the amount of work we had left to complete. The bottom line is representing time passing. And if this line goes up, it means the amount of work we have left to do increases. If it goes down, it means the amount of work is decreasing. So if it goes up, it could be that we're splitting down work items and covering more complexity, adding more scope. If it goes down, it could be we're taking items out, we're delivering items. So here we go. This is day one. The team has started work and we can see that the line is trending down. So they're getting through some items and it's just decreasing as you'd expect. The next line I'm going to draw on this chart is going to represent the forecasted date range for the number of items left. So for this new line, if this goes up, it means our forecasted date range is moving out. And if it goes down, it means it's coming in. So here we go. So you can see the little line there. You'll notice it doesn't start on the same date as the red line. And the reason for this is, as I said a couple of slides ago, is we need 10 or more work items, a cycle time of 10 or more items to be able to start forecasting. So we just had to wait a little bit with this team to get going. But what you see in here is the forecasted date range for the number of work items on that day, using all the data we've collected up until that point. So the team keep delivering, our red line's coming down, so we're churning through work or we're de-scoping items. Basically the amount of work left to do is decreasing. And you can see our bottom line is fairly flat, which means that our forecast isn't really moving around and is pretty stable. So this is pretty good news, right? The next thing that happened was this. So when I talk about signals in data and having opportunity to take action, this is one of those moments. So we see the red lines flattening out. So that means we're not delivering, we're not sort of decreasing the amount of work left to do, and our forecasted date range is moving out. So there could be a number of reasons for this. So this could be we're uncovering complexity, the work's a bit bigger than we thought. It could be we're splitting down items. It could be that we're blocked. What was actually happening here? We had a bit of a conversation, and the team, who were wonderfully helpful, got involved in quite a gnarly production issue, and were trying to help people out there, which meant they were no longer delivering this work. And whilst that was great, they were completely the wrong team to be doing this. So we had a bit of a chat, we got the work into the right team, and then they were able to keep delivering. So as you see, the sort of red line starts trending down now, and the forecasted date range is flattened out, which means we're stabilizing again. But what you'll notice here now is our forecasted date range is now later than it was before. So this is an opportunity for us to remanage those expectations. It's an opportunity to talk about, is there something we can do if we need to bring that forecasted date range back in? Is it cut scope? Is it think of another sort of solution to this problem? And it results in a difficult conversation sometimes, but it's a better conversation to have now than it is later down the track. The other thing with this as well is this type of scenario is the type of one that might happen as you go along your delivery, but you don't think, oh, we probably need to re-estimate, because it was quite a small incident that might not have been noticed. And these are all the little micro events that happen when you're delivering that impact that estimate that you couldn't have seen coming, you didn't know was happening. But if we're looking at this data in real time and it's giving us signals for conversations, we can then start to use it. The next thing that happens in this situation, and I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but we had a sort of, oh, whilst you're in there, you're working in this area, can you just squeeze these little bits in as well? And previously there are two ways we would have dealt with that. So we would have either gone, yeah, absorbed it and just hope for the best, or spent a bunch of time replanning and re-estimating, which would have taken the team's time. But instead, we were able to just quickly run a forecast, say, well, if it's about this amount of extra stuff, this is what it looks like. So this is really predictable for us, I hope. You add more scope, the date goes out. But actually having this data allows you to have really tangible conversations around, okay, we can do that, but this is what it's going to cost you. Or could we maybe approach this differently? Can we deliver in smaller chunks? And if this is really that important, it'll be the next thing we do. So again, enabling lots of great conversations. So need to talk about the people side of this, because as we were talking about in our breakout groups as well, people are a huge part of using data and getting people to sort of buy into this, use it the right way, not game the system. So I spent a lot of time talking about this new data. I tailored those discussions based on who I was talking to. They were like heads of departments, even the COO, and then the teams. And what I find is it's really easy to get nods and acceptance and like, yeah, this sounds like a great thing to do. You're going to manage my expectations. I'm going to be able to mitigate risk. However, when you start doing it, the first thing that happens when those dates start moving around is people get uncomfortable. And when people get uncomfortable, they revert to what they know, which is certainty. And this is where you really need to double down on the education. Forecasting hasn't actually removed certainty. So that date that you would have had when we planned and we estimated, that was always wrong. Now you have more information than you had before. So the forecasting hasn't taken away the certainty. We're now understanding the true story. And we have options. So if we're hearing news we don't like, we can actually do something about it before it's too late. And if we're to aim for that certainty, yes, we can plan and estimate and get you dates, and we can re-estimate and re-estimate. But that's an activity that's slowing the people down who are delivering that work. So we have a number of learnings from our probabilistic forecasting so far. So yes, it helps us manage expectations early. We do end up having some more uncomfortable conversations, but actually the end result is better. As with all data, it's really useless without conversation. So if you've got someone off on the side generating forecasts and keeping them to themselves or sharing them and not talking about the signals you're getting, you might as well not be doing it. You're wasting your time. As I've said, it can be uncomfortable because people love certainty, even though that's not the world we're playing in. This takes time. So I first got exposed to probabilistic forecasting probably 6 years ago. I saw a talk by Dan Vacanti sort of blew my mind. And I was like, this is something we need to try. But that was like 5 or 6 years ago. And, we've been chipping away at it year after year. And when you're in organizations, so I've been in Principality for quite some time, the people around you can change sometimes, and then it takes re-education. So like if you're sort of, I don't know, your head of department changes, they may have a view and you have to sort of retrain, go through the same process and get people to understand the data. So it can take time, but ultimately it's worth it. And what I would say as well is getting started helps adoption. So a little bit of a tangential story here, that when I first started doing this, one of the other Scrum Masters in the company saw what I was doing and was like, can you come and do that for our program? Let's have a chat. And I went over, we did some forecasting, we started talking about it. And unfortunately, the forecast came out as 85% on or before a date that was 6 months later than their plan. So the team look at that and they're like, nah, we can do it faster than that. And the project manager and the stakeholders are going, well, we'll take their answer, thank you very much. And they took their blue pill, they put their head in the sand, and they just carried on delivering and never forecasted again. They were late. They were obviously late. They were late by, it was like weeks off the forecasted date range. And now they do forecast. So I guess my point is getting started helps the adoption, even if it doesn't take first time. I think sometimes you need to let the data prove itself, which this did. So that's all I was going to talk about on probabilistic forecasting. I'm going to move on to flow data next. So the concepts of forecasting obviously explained to teams and stakeholders, but with the teams, I was also able to show them that just by collecting the cycle times for probabilistic forecasting, we were already capturing flow metrics, and that could help us continuously improve, become more efficient, deliver more value, and take action every day that makes a meaningful difference to how we were delivering and make us feel like we're improving. So I've explained we were capturing cycle time for our forecasts. If you imagine that each of these green dots is a user story, or whatever work item you use for as is user stories, and we're measuring the cycle time for this, so the items are flowing from left to right, from start to end of your system. So for any item we have that has a start date but not an end date, we know exactly how old that is, and that's our work item age. If we add all those items up, we know exactly how much is in progress in the system. And then for everything with an end date, we know the rate of delivery, so we know our throughput. So these 4 flow metrics are really powerful, and I'll show you some real data of how we've used these in the past as well. But they fall into 2 camps. So work item age and work in progress, they're inside our system. They are items that haven't finished. We can influence the future of these. The data's active and current, but they become cycle time and throughput. So you don't have something with an age and a cycle time. The work item age becomes a cycle time once it's complete. And cycle time is like a super important metric because it represents the amount of time it takes for us to get that customer feedback, and it also allows us to do some really useful, powerful stuff to continuously improve. And let's have a look at some real data for this now. So this is a real team that I had back in 2018 when we first started using these flow metrics with the team. What you're seeing here is a cycle time scatter plot. So for each dot, the bottom axis represents the date in which it was delivered, and then the y-axis represents the cycle time, so how long it took to get through our system. So as you can see, this data is a bit all over the place. All of these items that are highlighted now were items that were taking longer than a sprint to deliver. So we took this data into a retrospective. We had a bit of a chat about it, proposed an experiment that we would start controlling for WIP. We would start adding work in progress limits into our team. So we'd just experiment for a couple of sprints and see what happened. And this was really interesting, actually, because the team got really uncomfortable by it. They felt like they weren't delivering as much. They felt like they weren't being as productive, and actually felt really uncomfortable for them. So, we then decided to look at the data, and this is what it was showing us. So as you can see, all the cycle times dramatically reduced. We were delivering inside a sprint now. And this allowed us to, and we didn't lose any throughput either. And this allowed us to have some really good conversations about the way they were feeling. So we're like, okay, so you're feeling like you're not delivering as much. Is it that you were burnt out before and this is what it feels like not to be burnt out? Is it that maybe we do need to play around with the WIP limit? So we went really simple to start with. We just set a one whole system WIP limit. Maybe we needed to go to columns or play around with what that number is, which is what we did. Or we talked about as well, if we're feeling like we've got a little bit of extra capacity and we've not dropped our throughput, maybe we could put that into some personal development. So yeah, lots of great conversations came off the back of this, even though it wasn't feeling great at the time. The other thing this allows us to do is what's called a single item forecast. So you can set a service level expectation, an SLE. So this is exactly the same chart of data that we've just been looking at. But this time there's percentile markers on the side. So these aren't averages or standard deviations, these are percentile lines. Which means, so if we take the 85th percentile, for example, for this date range, 85% of the work items were completed in 21 days or less. So 85% of the items were completed below this line. So this was 2018, this was pre-COVID, we were obviously in the office, this used to be plastered on our board, when we used to have daily conversations about this in our stand-ups. But it's really important that we look at the data set we're using when we're communicating SLEs. So if we were to look at this data before the experiment around WIP limits, it's showing that our SLE was an 85% chance of delivering a work item in 25 days or less. And if we look at after, it was in 7 days or less. So once you've had a really big fundamental change, we found, so like if you've done an experiment and it's drastically changed your data and you know this is the new way you deliver, you just need to cut off that old data because it no longer represents how you deliver. Everyone here familiar with Schrodinger's cats? Yes. You know, cat in a box. You don't know if it's dead or alive until you open the box. No cats harmed in the making of this slide, I will caveat it with. Let me introduce you to what I believe is Schrodinger's work item. So I believe that an item that's active in our system, so when it has an age before it's a cycle time, it represents both potential value and waste. So we've spoken to our customers, we believe what we're delivering is valuable and the right thing to do. But actually, until we deliver it, we don't really know, until the customer's using it and seeing it. And sometimes you get that, yeah, we really want this, and then you deliver it and they may not. You haven't had that feedback. It might need to be iterated on. Until we deliver it, we don't know. And the point here is not to experiment. We should be trying to deliver different things. It's about keeping the cat in the box for the shortest amount of time. So keeping the work in our system for the shortest amount of time so we get that answer as quickly as possible. So we want our items to not unnecessarily age. So there are two main ways you can do that. Firstly, don't start the item. If you don't start it, it's not getting old. And secondly, you can finish it. So that's really unhelpful, I realise that. But what I mean by this is we don't want to start our work items until we know they can flow through the system. So we want to start them, and when we do start them, we want to manage that work in progress with the goal of finishing. And there are a number of ways we can do this, right? So as we've talked about, we can limit the amount of work in progress. We can also make items small, make sure they're able to flow through the system. The smaller they are, the less resistance they're going to get. And finally, we want to take action on the items that are unnecessarily aging. So what you might be thinking now is, well, how do I know? How much age is too much age? How do I know if it's unnecessarily aging? So I've showed you a cycle time scatter plot. This is an age in work in progress chart, a really simple one. So we've got 3 items, and these are items that are active in our system. You can see one is 3 days old, one is 6 days old, one is 12 days old. And these are things that are currently in our system. So how do we know which ones of these are too old or which one of these need action? So we talked about an SLE. We've calculated one of them, so we can overlay it onto this. So we know our SLE from historic data, and that allows us to have great conversations about these items. So items that might be over the SLE. So these are conversations we'd have in our daily stand-up, and we'll be like, okay, so we've gone over our SLE. Do we need to break it down? Is it blocked? Do we still care about it? Should we actually stop? Is the fact that it's old, that it's not that important? So allowing us to have those really valuable conversations to maintain flow and predictability and to ultimately deliver value to customers. Also conversations about items that are creeping towards the line. Do we think it's still achievable in our SLE? If not, again, do we need to split? Do we need to kick it out? Is it blocked? Is there some other action we need to take? So real sort of action in the moment. So back to this chart. So this is our familiar data we've been looking at for the past few slides. Can anyone, I don't know if in the chat you can have a bit of a guess of how many story points you think this item was given. I know this is an impossible question, but maybe just chuck in some answers around what this could be story point wise. Okay, can't actually see the chat, so I'm hoping there's a lot of different answers coming up.
Between 1 and 13, Julie.
Lovely, yeah. And, you know, it's a really hard question to answer, right, without context. But what I want to show you now is if we overlay, I'll colour change them to represent the actual story points, which might be a bit hard to see on the screen, but I'll read it out. So what we can see is that item was a 3-point story. Also, if you look at the 1-day line right at the bottom of the chart, those are also 3-point stories. Story points were an illusion, and they were never meant to equate to time anyway, right? That's not their purpose. They're not meant to equate to time. But I find, you know, this isn't a team that's bad at estimating either. I see this team after team, whether people estimate in points or in hours. And I'm not here to hate on story points either. We still have teams who use story points. If you use them for conversation or to get value or to understand the work, absolutely buy it. But we should not be using, in my opinion, should not be using story points to manage expectations. We should not be using them to plan work because they're not reliable. They can't take into account the uncertainty that's going to happen along the way. And yeah, I see this team after team. Even if you look after our experiment, there's like a 10-day variance in those 3-point stories. And then finally, for flow metrics, we look at throughput. So this is probably out of all of the charts the one we now use the least. We used to use it a lot at the start of this because we were making some quite drastic ways of working changes. This is showing how much we deliver like over time, what our throughput is, and the green line is just a trend line. So you can see here it's going up. So at the start, it was dramatically going up because we were having some quite dramatic ways of working changes. This doesn't always go up though. And when it doesn't, so just like forecasting over time, it gives us an opportunity to like have signals. So if it goes down or flat lines, just have a conversation. Is it because people are on holiday? Is it because we're blocked? Is there something we need to do here? Can we help the teams? Is it just fine and just one of those things? But it's about having the conversation. And then finally, I've talked a bit about, you know, we've taken our red pill, we're well and truly down the rabbit hole. We now take a more data-driven approach to delivery. And we realise whilst we're better now than we ever have been before, in certain areas, we still have non-optimal delivery methods, particularly in what we've branded as like our path to life, which is like the ways of working, technical path, culture, processes involved in getting work into the hands of our customers. So we want to keep using data in a meaningful way. Our aspirations really align to the investigation conducted by the DORA research programme, and we want to use a data-driven approach to improving the capabilities and practices for the benefit of our organisation, but ultimately our customers. So DevOps research and assessment. So this represents over 8 years of research and data from over 33,000 professionals worldwide. It provides an independent view into the practices and capabilities that drive high performance in tech and culture. So it gives us like guidance and metrics, and we can use that to monitor and our current state and like track improvements over time. If anyone else hasn't heard of this or looked at it, I'd really recommend that because you can sort of answer a few questions and benchmark yourself against the rest of your industry, and it gives you an indication on what capabilities to focus on to drive your software delivery performance. So Our approach to this has been to work with the teams, understand our capabilities, understand what we need to do to improve our performance, and set a direction that will help us with this journey. So we're really early days in this. But there are 4 DORA metrics. So for those who don't know, we firstly have lead time, and this is tracked. So you hear different sort of definitions for what lead time is. From a DORA perspective, they count it as code commit to deployed in production. It's a lot like cycle time in that it has a start and an end, and we can put these in scatter plots, and we can have SLEs for them. We use Actionable Agile for this as well. We then have deployment frequency, so how often we deploy to production, time to restore, so how long does it generally take us to restore a service when an incident or a defect that impacts users occurs, so like an unplanned outage. And then finally, our change failure percentage. So what percentage of the changes to production results in a degraded service and subsequently requires remediation? So there's a really healthy tension between these numbers, which is really important. Obviously, we want them to move in certain directions, but we talk about them together. We never talk about targets, we talk about trends. So, for example, we wouldn't want our lead time to start coming down, but actually our change failure percentage go through the roof. So these are talked about together, and we talk about trends. There is no target for us, only to improve or to understand the context of what's happening if things are going in an unexpected direction. So we've looked at DORA capabilities and the metrics. That's what we've agreed we're going to sort of do. And then we did an exercise across the value streams to do some value stream mapping. So if you were to look at this slide, for example, imagine it's a system and these are all different parts of your system. The amount this can output is 1 widget a day because we've got a bottleneck at section C. So we can do all the improvements we want in section A, B, and D, and that might be great. But actually our customers aren't seeing any extra value, our metrics aren't improving. So we did a value stream mapping exercise, understood where our bottlenecks were and our opportunities were, and as a group of delivery teams came up with a bunch of experiments. We hypothesized on what changes we could make at bottlenecks and what impact that would have, which allowed us to then prioritize those opportunities. So this is where we are. We've understood our current state. We've understood opportunities to improve and prioritize those. We're now implementing and measuring those and then understanding the impact on our system and going back around that loop. So again, really early days for us on this, but we're a 160-year-old organization, right? And we have a real mix of like legacy and new technologies. And on top of this, there's like a mindset and culture shift for a lot of our processes. And we're relatively early in our journey. But what we're finding is this is giving us more visibility into how our system is working, how each change is impacting us, and giving us as a group of delivery teams choices of what to do next. So we have sessions around this where we unpack the data and we talk about what we're doing and what the next thing we should try is. But again, yeah, super early days for us. So thanks for staying with me so far. I know talk on data late in the day late in the day for me, not for everyone, might be a little bit heavy. But I'll just recap. So we've been talking about probabilistic forecasting, and we use this because software delivery isn't certain. So it's a way of us stop treating it like it is. We have continuous conversations now, so we manage expectations along the way. Sorry, it drops a minute. Manage expectations along the way so that we're not having those difficult conversations too late in the process. We're now solving problems instead of symptoms. So we're seeing the problems as they happen rather than the symptom of being late. We're using flow metrics to drive meaningful action, to help the teams continuously improve and analyze like how they can get better. And it's like really a tool for them to use to help improve. We don't go like comparing cycle times or anything undesirable like that. And now we're using DORA data to help us to try and improve our capabilities and get better and improve. So I said I'd share some resources. These are them. I'm happy to share the slides as well if anyone wants them. But the 2 books on the end by Dan Vacanti, if you're interested in probabilistic forecasting and how you can use that, I'd really recommend those. The talk that got me into all of this is that top one. I don't know if people have seen it, but the Hurricane talk by Dan Bacanti as well. Yeah, I'd really recommend that. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for staying with me. I guess I don't know if there's any questions. I can't see the chat.
I'll ask a question.
Cool. Okay.
Thank you, Julie. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Happy to hear about your 6-year journey. Mine is just starting with my organization for Flow Metrics.
Oh, lovely.
I'm actually just about done with Dan's book. When will it be done?
Brilliant.
I'm not sure when it'll be done, but soon. I have a question about aging WIP. It's something I've been introducing to some of my teams and getting a little bit of pushback, but I'm working through it. You mentioned your one example. You had the potentially stop working on something.
Yeah.
My understanding of like Little's law assumes things that start the system will finish the system.
Correct.
So how does that, like, if you decide not to do it, is that a violation, or just like it's such a minimal time it happens, it's okay that it happens?
So it is absolutely a violation of Little's law, but we shouldn't be using Little's law to forecast. We need to remember. So Little's law represents how it works in an ideal world, and there are things you want to sort of limit. But I guess what I'd argue is it's better to stop work that isn't valuable and you don't need to do, rather than carry on just because it makes the numbers marry up. So about having that sort of pragmatic approach to that. But yeah, it absolutely is a violation of one of the principles of Little's law. But it depends on what you're using Little's law for as well. You absolutely shouldn't be using it to forecast.
No, I just saw that it was a curiosity as
Yeah.
early on in my journey, and enjoying many things flow right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Little's law is fascinating, like to do those sort of checkbacks and see how it's looking. But yeah, I wouldn't get overly worried about violating it for that if it's the right thing to do for value.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from anyone? There are a few calls for sharing the slides, if that's something you'd be happy to do, Julie.
Absolutely, yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So if you share those with me later, I will host them somewhere, or you can just share a direct link to them, and yeah, I'll make sure people can access those.
Yeah, lovely. No, I'll send you them after this, Chris.
Perfect.
I have one question, sorry if you don't mind, about service level expectations.
Yeah.
So I haven't used them before, and so I'm just wondering, how do you get to that expectation? Is it something that the team works on? Is it a mapping experimentation that you get folks in the room together, talk about it, and then create the expectation? So if you could just shed some light on that for me, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, so the service level expectation is what you get. So when you've got your cycle time scatter plot, you literally take it out of the data. So for us, so I talk about, you choose the percentage you want to use. We use 85%, so I'll use that as an example. It's all the dots on that scatter plot. 85% of them are under a line, 15% are above that line. And that's your service level expectation. So we're saying that 85% of the time we complete a story in so many days or less, or a work item, whatever it is, you can be feature, task, whatever. So you actually calculate it from your data. But what I guess if you're new to teams sometimes happens is that you don't have enough data to do that. So in that instance, until you get enough data, you can just have a gut feel guess, because it doesn't take long for you to get to that point where you actually calculate your SLE. I don't know if that helps, if that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. It does help, understand better, how you get to the SLE and how you create that data. So thank you.
Yeah. And what I'd recommend as well is, so Actionable Agile actually has a free trial where you can just manually upload data. Go in there and have a play, because they make it really easy for you to see these things.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
A few more questions. Mr. Hanson.
Yeah. Hi, Julie. Hey, Christopher. Good to see you guys. So, Julie, you mentioned that other teams within your company weren't doing this. How is it spreading throughout the company? Is it uniform? Is it in a small segment of teams? How are you scaling it?
So about 6 years ago, that was probably the case. So we were still in programs then. So on the program I was on, we were using it. and then other teams weren't. And like I said, it took a while to get people to take with that. But where we are now is like we're in value streams and we have lots of different delivery teams, but each value stream operates really differently. So it has spread, all the value streams are using it, but they're using it very differently actually. So some people use their probabilistic forecasting to forecast how many items they're going to get done in the next sprint. Others will sort of go, okay, so how much stuff can we deliver by the end of the month? And that helps you ruthlessly prioritize, because if you go into your product owner, well, the forecast can tell us it tells us, I don't know, 20 items, which 20 do you want? It helps with some of those more tricky conversations where people are like, well, I want it all. It's like, well, you can only have this much. And then there's other value streams as well. So especially when it's the more regulatory type stuff and you have like a sort of big, this thing needs to be done by this date, really hard to actually get it sort of into production iteratively. Sometimes we get a little bit more traditional with it and it's like, okay, so this is the date, how many things, let's plan with that. And then as you learn over time as well, so at the start, you're not going to know how big it is, but it's having those constant conversations. So yeah, it is spreading. I guess I'm in a fortunate position as well, because previously I was a Scrum Master, but now I sort of work with all the Scrum Masters and delivery managers in the company as well. So I've shared a lot of this knowledge with them and they've gone off and used it in different ways. And we have a bit of a community of practice around it. So yeah, we spread it that way as well.
So you transitioned more into Agile coaching role to help spread it out and be that glue between the Scrum Masters and the leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that helps me to have those sort of conversations with like the sort of more senior managers and try and get them on board to support it as well. Because I do think you do need a bit of buy-in from above as well if you're using it to manage expectations. Because if people just want a date, which you know does happen sometimes, and in those instances, I'd always recommend do both. If you're being forced to give certainty, do your forecast as well, because you're uncovering that information. And then hopefully people wean themselves off the fake certainty.
Yeah, I'd imagine that'd take a lot of time to do because that's just in business culture is not a popular thing.
No, and like I said in the talk, actually we find, you know, like you get some really significant people in the company change, and you get people coming in and they've got their ideas and about how things work. It's like sometimes it can be like a little bit of a reset when you're working with those people. So yeah, sometimes it's like a little step back and then get them up to speed.
Cool. All right, that's helpful. Thanks, Julie.
No worries. No more?
I just have one quick question. Julie, can you quickly explain to me what I've heard of it in reference, but what does little law mean and how is it, should you not apply it, I guess, in this sense?
Yeah, so Little's law is basic. I think, Fred, you might even be able to help me here if you're currently researching it. So it's a law which relates to queuing theory. So like how things will flow through a system based on how much work in progress you have, what the throughput is, and what the cycle time is. So it's an equation that sort of balances those three numbers. And it has a number of assumptions to that. Yeah. One of those, as Fred mentioned, was you assume that everything that enters a system leaves the system for this ratio, for this equation to balance. So when, absolutely, as Fred was saying, if you take something out of the system and it doesn't get to finish, you're violating Little's law, which means that equation wouldn't balance and wouldn't be right. But it's a tool for, like, you wouldn't ever use it to forecast because I don't know all the things off the top of my head. There's quite a lot of assumptions, but it is likely you are violating one or more of them at any given time, which is why you can't really use it to forecast.
What were you talking about? Is that Little's law?
Little's law, yeah. If you look at Little's law.
So, like, my understanding is, I mean, the basis of it is for a given process, the more things that you are working on at any given time on average, the longer it's going to take for those things to finish on average.
Yeah.
Right? So it's actually your average cycle time divided by your average WIP. What you take your average WIP divided by your average throughput.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use that with teams to kind of showcase, like, hey, if we limit our cycle time, or if we limit our WIP by one item, here's how we might improve our cycle time.
Yeah, and people have such a hard time grasping that because they think the more things I'm working on, the more things I'm going to finish, and that's just like we live in a society of people who think multitasking is possible and context switching isn't costly. Right?
Yeah. So. There's a really great video I love on context switching when you get into those conversations. It's and I get to share that with Chris to share at the end. Is the Heinrich Nieberg one where he draws smileys, he draws smiley faces. I see a few nods. Yeah,
yeah.
Really brilliant video that really hammers home the point of how expensive like context switching is, and how actually it makes no sense to start a lot of things at the same time. So yeah, I play that for everyone who ever mentions that.
We've played a game in retro for that where they have to write like numbers, letters, and the Roman numeral. So they start writing it across, right, and then having them do it straight down, and they're timing themselves, and it's pretty impactful the difference in timing, right?
Yeah, because it's a huge difference, right? If they yeah. Oh, Chris has shared that link in the chat for anyone who hasn't seen the Smiley Builder.
Oh yeah, thanks, Chris.
It's a great video.
It is.
Right, so I guess a couple of questions that I have is more to the wider audience. We did our 1, 2 for all. We captured some of our top challenges with data. We had weaponization. We had misunderstanding of data. And there's one more, Fred, you might be able to remember that's slipped my mind right now. Has Julie helped you perhaps have some things to think about as to how you might handle those if you face those again in the workplace? Got a couple of yes, 100%. Absolutely.
Hands.
Some noise. Good stuff. Now, I'm going to invite you folks to use the soundboards. It's now enabled for everyone. Where those reactions are, it's unlocked. Please give Julie some love for her great session today, some appreciation for her. All noise is welcome. There we go.
I love this. I want this the end of every meeting.
One of my favorite things about butter. Awesome work. Any final unanswered questions, folks?
No, this is all great. Thank you, Julie.
Cool.
And I just want to say thank you, Chris, for having me along. I really appreciate you inviting me.
It's a pleasure. A final quick poll for you. Your return on time invested today. 1 is the worst use of your time. 5 was the best use of your time. Obviously, this helps us continuously improve how we deliver these sessions for you folks. If there are any future guests you'd like to hear from, don't hesitate to drop those in the chat. I'll see if I can charm them into coming and joining us. Otherwise, until next time, it's been a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
You.
Thanks,
Bye.
Julie. It was really good to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Chris. Bye.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Julie.
That was awesome. So, yeah, I wish I could have been there at the beginning. I just had a business meeting that ran over.
It's all good. We were just doing the 1, 2, 4 all part, so you didn't miss any of the important stuff, which is the things that Julie was sharing.
Although I had some trouble sharing my screen at the start, it seems, so I don't know how much of the start everyone saw.
Yeah, there seemed to be a couple of issues tech-wise for some people. Some people couldn't see the screen share. A couple of people had some audio issues. I'm not sure what was happening because it seemed to be okay for the majority. I'm not sure it was just a personal browser thing, or I don't know.
Oh no, that's good to know. I thought no one saw the start bit. But...
Oh no, the vast majority could. There was just a couple of people that couldn't. So that was why I waited for a time when you kind of transitioning between slides and was like, before we continue, would you mind just resharing and seeing if that fixed it? And it did.
Brilliantly done.
Nice. Well,
all right. Thank you so much.
Enjoy your evening. Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.